There's so many smiles this morning. It's so great. I keep moving the screen so I can see all the faces. And I see several people who are on this island with me, at least two. We got Donna and Marla, and then a couple of others in Hawaii and all around. But I was just struck with how many smiles there were. So that might be a useful form to include in your sitting. Just a little smile as we sit together for just the next few moments to settle and appreciate this wonderful opportunity. To begin with the four practice principle. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. Caught in the self-centered dream, only suffering. Holding to self-centered thoughts, exactly the dream. Each moment, life as it is, the only teacher. Being just this moment, compassion's way. As some of you know, I'm just coming off retreat here in Hawaii. It's been a kind of a long haul from the third week in March to now here right at the end of May. All wonderful and rich, but one powerful and lovely and enriching event after another with so many of you. When we gathered for the retreat here in Hawaii last week, there was a joke, is we all should have brought a little picture frame to put around our head so we could recognize each other for the little square. Because when they have the whole body, it's like, oh yeah, I've seen you online. It was wonderful to get together. The retreat that we just completed for more than 20 years, Donna and I, who's with us today, by the way, if you see Donna's image, she's in the Koa cabin at Hui Ho'olana right now. We shared the leading of this wonderful week here, and we called it the Heart of Meditation. I remember sitting at the table during a Hakomi training in Austin at Tenzo, the retreat center that Erin used to help manage, deciding that we would come to Hawaii. She invited me, and we would try this thing and see how it went. And that's the name we came up with. And now, 23 years later, that was in 1999, we just completed our final week. A beautiful expression and offering has come to its end fully and beautifully and completely. And when we thought in 2019 it might be our final, but then some of the Hakomi students, Maru Serrano and some others, had said, well, you still have something to offer. Why don't we try another one? And then it took us 3 years to get back because of the pandemic. It was first called Embodied Mindfulness, and then it ended up as Hakomi as spiritual practice, since there were so many of the Hakomi community folks who wanted to come. As we began our retreat, Don and I decided we should ask a pretty important question. If the title of the week was Hakomi as spiritual practice, most people had experience in the methodologies and experiences of Hakomi, but maybe we should answer the question, what is a spiritual practice? And what would make it such? So we posed this early on and sat with it and worked with it for the entire week. Less about Hakomi itself, that we have some experience in. The process of assisted self-discovery and mindfulness and all of the beautiful sensitivity and expressivity that goes through Hakomi. But what is a spiritual practice actually, and how do we understand that in contrast to psychological or yogic practices that are focused on personal improvement. And where does mindfulness fit into this whole thing? These are the kind of questions that we were sitting with. I'm sure many of you, these are common questions. Last time I spoke a few weeks ago, I brought the sort of basic question. It's like, what are we doing? Why are we practicing? That, like, the real fundamental question. But then once you say, okay, I'm here, and what is a spiritual practice? These are pretty basic questions. I did what all of us do, in asking a question is you go on the internet, like, how do people define spiritual practice? So here's an amalgam. This is a little synthesis of a couple of them. What I found, it says a spiritual practice is any regular and intentional activity that establishes, develops, and nourishes a personal relationship with the mystery, the divine, the absolute, whatever you want to call it, and a path through which we allow ourselves to be transformed. It's a discipline of returning over and over and remembering our deepest intention. And the path, the journey or pilgrimage, it's talked about differently in different places, is without end, but which continually opens as we live our way into it. So it's a regular and intentional activity. It develops or nourishes a relationship with the sort of unknowable. And there's often a path through which we allow ourselves to be transformed. And there's a discipline. There's discipline of returning to our deepest intention. And that this path or pilgrimage or journey doesn't have an end, but continually unfolds. So these are just some of the qualities that I began to see if I looked up definitions. And I also wanted to say that when I was listening to the offerings that in the last few weeks, Suzanne talked about this, the dynamic questions for discovery, embodying the question of being alive. She spoke about much more, but I like this idea of spiritual practice involves a dynamic kind of questioning, a discovery. And then Joel, spoke about the wellspring of joy that can move in practice, of restoring the practice of joy and play, the play of emptiness in a way. And then through it, Peg a couple of weeks ago spoke about the function of attention as support for this radiant relational power that infuses our life through practice. So they're weaving some of these pieces together. And I thought, it's as if we find some way to dance with emptiness or understand the way that emptiness dances in the universe. But of course, what arose immediately also are all of the things, this is very teacherly, I think about, okay, and here are the things that practice is not, that people think about. They come to me and they say, oh, I have a practice, and it makes me really relaxed and calm. Relaxation isn't a spiritual practice, and being calm and peaceful isn't a spiritual practice. People say, well, my practice is gardening or walking around the lake or painting. Those are wonderful practices, and I recommend every one of them, and they will bring you some of these beautiful aspects of peace and ease, but they're not transformative spiritual practices. They're wonderful things to do, nourishing things to do, that may lead you towards spiritual practice. But because it makes you relaxed and calm, doesn't make it a spiritual practice. Some people say, well, I engage in self-reflection. I sit and get calm and reflect. And that may be an element of spiritual practice at times, but turning toward the self can reinforce self-reflection and self-identification, and more of a kind of almost a hardening into the self, not a freeing of the space in which the self arises and passes away. So self-reflection isn't actually it. People say, well, but I'm mindful. So if I'm using mindfulness, then it's a spiritual practice. You have to remember, secular mindfulness, the way that it's taught nowadays, is essentially amoral. Because without the precepts, you can be mindful as you do some things that are not very wholesome. You can mindfully steal or lie and distort on social media. Buddha's mindfulness was a function to open beyond personal concern, to not for the benefit of personal concerns, but to open us beyond. Other people will say, well, I'm focusing on or worshiping a deity, so that makes it a spiritual practice. It might be religious, but it may not be a practice necessarily. And goodness knows we know the limits of this kind of thing. There are many people I knew in the church in which I grew up, which they focused on a deity, on a God, but I couldn't tell that much spiritual practicing was going on in personal transformation. There's a lot of spiritual bypassing, and if I was doing this, it kind of took care of things, if I was worshiping. So that doesn't seem to be the whole bit. And believing in something, believing in something is not the same thing as a living embodiment down to your bones of the mystery that spiritual practice can open. It makes it smaller, actually. And then there's sort of the New Age thing of get out of your head and get into your body. What's so wrong about clear thinking? Certainly, if people elevate thinking and concepts over embodiment, that's a problem. And also, if you elevate embodiment over thinking, that's a problem. Because you might just end up in emotionality and things without... The function of maturity is to think and feel at the same time and find them as one confluent activity that moves through this body, of course. And last, in my list that I came up with of what people tell me, they say, well, I'm being more loving and more relational. That's great. Love does seem to be a thread that moves through spiritual practice, but it's not enough. Anybody who's been in a long-term relationship knows. You can love someone and it's not enough. So these are some things that just kind of poke a little bit at what people say. Well, I'm doing a spiritual practice. But what most of us are doing are things that are management functions, not spiritual practices. They're wonderful, useful, productive, helpful management functions. And so what I'm suggesting is that a spiritual practice is more about mystery than management. When you've heard me say this before, a quote that I really remembered from Kadagiri Roshi when he was asked what is a practice, he said, it's the one thing you do under all circumstances. Now, what's interesting is that was his definition of practice, not spiritual practice. The one thing you do, in other words, what are you actually practicing? Because the one thing you might do under all circumstances is lie or drink or I don't know. There's a lot of things you could do which are not particularly wholesome. That's the thing you turn to. That is what you practice. And what you practice, you'll get better at. So you have to really notice what it is you're practicing. And is it wholesome or unwholesome? And last time I think I mentioned that Joko Beck famously suggested that your practice would open your being to a larger container to hold more of life, so life energy could flow more fully. So there's something about the discipline of continuing over and over that you turn to, and that opens you beyond just the smaller self or personal concerns. And once again, I want to say there's nothing wrong with management techniques. To be calm is better than being anxious. To have a focus and being self-reflective is better than being just distracted. And there are a lot of ways in which the things I mentioned can be useful. They're just not spiritual practices. So through the teachings of Appamada, and I don't mean Appamada as a place, I mean the Buddha's teaching of Appamada, of mindful, diligent care, and our Zen practices and forms, all of these unfold as a mandala, like an infinite ecosystem. Think about it in terms of our verses that we use, okay? So we're called to practice for many reasons, as I spoke about last time, but the great matter is kind of at the bottom of it all. When we're asking, like, what is this? I've been given this body, I've been given this life. I know I'm going to die. I don't really appreciate it, but I kind of know it in my head. And as it comes closer, it's really important. And this is what's on the Han, great is the matter of birth and death. That's what calls us to practice, literally and also philosophically in some ways. Literally the sound of the Han. So there's an echo that calls us, and then we're asked to chant the confession or repentance when we start our liturgy. That's the first thing we do. Basically, we have to confess that we're human and that we don't get to get out of that. We're like a chimera of karma expressed in this impermanent form. And yet we have to take responsibility for it and live it out. This is what we've got. We're going to have to live this out. So we say all our ancient twisted karma, from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, born through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. It's like, okay, yikes, I've got a body. I don't understand what this thing is. I'm going to die, but this is an amazing opportunity. So now I have to realize there's this infinitely interwoven, contingent thing I call a life, which I have full responsibility for. And it seems to be woven with these other people's. Doggone it. And now it's more complicated. And so if I'm going to be stripped of my management strategies, or at least not only contained by them, but able to step further, then what am I going to trust? If I can't just trust getting more calm, having more happiness, getting more stuff, what can I trust? Well, the refuges are next. Oh, there's an essential freedom that is at the core of everything in me and everything and everyone else. There's a dharma, there's a way that it moves and flows, which I can come into a relationship with and understand more fully and appreciate. And there are folks which I can do this with, which help remind me and support me and love me through it. That's the Sangha. So suddenly the call and then a return to what's essential begin to flow together in this mandala. And so how do I move with that energy in a way that is wholesome, which is the word I keep using, and we have the 4 practice principles as a guide or a path or a pilgrimage, a journey that we can use. We say, how are we caught in the self-centered dream? We can begin to notice our habits, what we cling to, essentially what do you practice, and how we hold to these practices or to these habit patterns of these things that are automatic, usually because they're fear-based, because they're protectors. They're not bad. They've been developed over time out of conditioning, and we begin to see life through these parts, through these conditioned frameworks, these lenses, this automatic, which is in our body. So we're caught in this sort of dream-like delusion, and we hold to these things and cling to them because we're frightened. And then the turn, of course, is the third line in the 4 practice principles, is if we're willing to move towards life as it is, then the larger container begins to unfold. We're not trying to protect this small life. We're willing to plunge into the fullness of life. And the question turns from not what happens, oh, bad things are happening, so my life is bad. Good things are happening, my life is good. That's never going to change. That's going to keep happening. The turn is, how am I going to respond? How am I going to work with what I've been given? And that way, each moment, life as it is the only teacher, being just this moment, the way of compassion is both wise and compassionate, to follow a way that flows with life. And this all has to be embodied. So we chant the verse of the robe, because we wear the teachings, the vast universal teachings, we begin to harmonize our lives with all being. Peg mentioned in the Lotus Sutra and some of the other early sutras and the Four Embraces, how the teacher said, it's hard to change the mind of humans. You can pacify it, you can distract it, you can do all those management strategies, but to actually transform, it's got to be embodied. And then our vow says, and because we realize in this interweaving, in this mandala of noticing what life is, returning to something that we can have faith in, taking refuge there, having a path we can follow, embodying that path, then we turn towards our relationship with everyone. The Bodhisattva vow calls us to turn toward all beings, to see through all delusion, to step through all dharma gates, to embody the way of freedom as our practices. This is the aspiration for everyone, including ourselves. And at the end of most of our ceremonies, there's a little phrase. It's also in another form in our meal chant that sometimes is overlooked. We live like a cloud in an endless sky, like a lotus in muddy water, one with the pure mind of Buddha. And it's reflecting on this essential aspect of practice. We live like a cloud in an endless sky. We live free, untethered in this vastness, and at the very same time rooted in the mud of humanity and contingent life. And that's where the Buddha flowers. And it's this dual nature that determines our spiritual practice. Coming to terms with not trying to solve, but open to this great mystery that both things can be true, that it's all one thing, actually. Because the last line says, one with the pure mind of Buddha. And then that's once again expressed and embodied as appamada, as mindful, diligent care with each other. So these are things that I was reflecting on as a result of my practice through the week. How we can turn towards mystery rather than endlessly seeking better management. How we can meet each dynamic question and take it deeper, as Suzanne suggested, and in the process find joy and even play in the field of emptiness, as Joel suggested, and focus and sharpen and develop and together open our attentional capacities, as Peg taught, with our dance with emptiness. And so these are the things that I, once again, I said, reflected on in my own practice through this last week. And as I sat with my own question, what is spiritual practice? So what about you? What are your questions, things that matter to you in this regard? I will say, if you don't mind, Donna, would you raise your hand just for a second? Because we spent so much time together, if she's still there. There she is. I just wanted to connect with you a moment and see if you had anything you wanted to say based on and what I'm reflecting on here. Yeah. I said the real reason I called on you is I just don't want to be done. So we're just,
I know. Okay. I dreamt about you all night.
oh, you didn't.
Uh, uh, everything that you said today starts me really questioning again, which I love because you're
Mhm.
saying embrace the mystery. And yeah, what I'm so aware of in this beautiful island, in this beautiful setting, is that for me, part of thinking of an intentional practice that's spiritual is uh, to really consciously meet every moment and every person and every thing with reverence.
Mhm.
For me, that's the quality, the reverence is to appreciate the gift that everything is and that it's sacred, and those words are, they kind of imply spirituality, I think, but there's a quality about that needs to be intentional, is
Mhm.
sometimes really spontaneous in some situations, but needs to be intentional most of the time.
Yeah.
And
Especially for those times when we're really challenged, when it doesn't feel obvious or easy.
exactly, yeah. And every time you get a whole group of people together in a place that's inspirational, but also healing in the sense of that it gets things moving,
Mhm.
which it does here. And then things arise that open me up to more dimensions of how to do that, how to be intentional, reverent, and see and meet everything as if it's sacred.
Mhm. Exactly. That I was just reading something, rereading something from our friend Peter Hershock, who's over in Honolulu, about his practice, and he uses kind of interesting words. He said these practices cultivate a capacity for appreciative and contributory virtuosity. It's kind of fancy words, but you and I talk about it as being convex and concave,
Mhm.
be able to receive the world in a certain way and respond back just with, and of course, the breath
Mhm.
is an easy way to remind us. And to be able to continue to breathe in the midst of whatever, that's the virtuosity part. Expressive and contributory, we offer ourselves to the world and receive the world in a way that just doesn't cause more problems.
Mhm. I think the breath is part of what can bring us back to the present moment
Mhm.
continually, but also remind us. I love the way our friend DeWitt summarized when I offered him a one
Yeah.
breath meditation. He said, take it all in and give it all back.
Yes. And you originally, the words you used were,
Well, let it all in and let it all go.
yeah. And then he kind of tweaked it a little bit.
He tweaked it, and I love that because there's a generosity in but that contribution part.
Right.
It's virtuosity and contribution. So it's something new. That's what I hear in virtuosity.
Yeah.
How is each moment, each person, each experience actually new? That's
Fresh.
the opening, fresh, not known before. So opening to the mystery,
Yes.
and how is it a gift,
Mhm.
and how can I respond to it in a way with generosity?
Thank you. And this is the problem when Donna and I get started. Or maybe it's the gift. It's fun because this is kind of what happened. So it's part of why I wanted to have a little more time because I'm integrating. I'm sure you must be too
Mhm.
from the week, and I thought this is another way to do it with others and extend. Even though we have several people online here who have been in the retreat and extended out. Oh, and I see Suzanne. Thanks, Donna. I love you.
Hello,
Hello.
Flint. I just love when you and Donna get together. It's like genius jazz musicians.
We missed you at the Hui, of course.
Well, I followed you and I'm so glad you asked Donna on so that I got to see her and see you, Donna. Yeah, so I was following you all week there. Um, and what I really appreciated about what you said today, Flint, was in my practice, what has really mattered is the forms of practice.
Hmm.
The bringing the right thinking and the body together get happens in the forms. And I've not been a big fan of forms for a long time. I mean, this was my edge in
Sure.
practice. But the recent retreat I attended, the more that I plunged into the forms, the more like the bowing, especially the bowing and the full prostrations,
Mhm.
the more I, I, I felt some transformation happening without my saying, "Oh, I'm going to transform this,"
Yes,
which is
because it isn't that kind of idea at all.
right, which is just another manager going, "Okay, we're going to go after transformation here,"
Hmm.
but that's not how it is at all.
Because there's no spiritual materialism in essentially just surrendering yourself
Mhm.
to the form rather than your personal idea of how you would like it to be.
Yes, yes. And what I got from doing the prostrations was what surrender really is surrendering the small self to the big self, surrendering conditioning to the absolute or to the mystery,
Mhm.
and being completely open to it.
Well, you know Katagiri's famous saying about that. I'm going to make I'm going to make a symbol. Okay,
Okay.
let the self rest on the self and allow the flower of your life force to bloom.
Thank you.
And there's in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, I don't have it memorized, but Donna could say it, is exactly the same teaching.
Mm.
In fact, can she come on at the same time, Maria?
Yes, yes, I'll
Okay.
just.
So just we'll get Donna back with you.
Good.
There she is. Now you're with her, see?
Oh, good. Hello, Dada.
Hey, Suzanne.
The yoga version, I think, is quite beautiful.
It's actually from the Upanishads,
Oh, is it? Okay.
ancient Sanskrit teachings, and it says, I also like to show people with the small and the big ass. It says, lift up the self by the self, and
Mm.
don't let the self droop low, for the self is the self's only friend, and the self is the self's only foe.
Mm.
Lift up the self by the self.
Mhm. Mm. Oh, I really like that, Donna.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
these various ways that we're talking about it allow the forms or the embodiment and enactment of this beyond concept, which
Yes,
is the level of transformation.
yes. That's why I think it's so important that in any spiritual practice, we need a movement practice like yoga. And I really loved your form of yoga, Donna, or Qigong, like I'm doing now, or Tai Chi. Any of those is really so essential for grounding in an authentic spiritual practice.
Mhm. Yeah, and if you think about it based on the retreat that we just did in Madison and also what you experienced when you were at Dharma Rain,
Mhm.
is at least the tradition that you're in, Zen practice, is taught through the forms.
Mhm.
It's really not, people think it's intellectual, but it's not. It's taught through the body
Mhm. Mhm.
that way.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you both. You could riff anytime, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
You're my Soto Zen John Baptiste, actually. So,
And one more word from our sponsor. Keep an eye out for Donna's new book on Soma Yoga, which is you just mentioned, in the next few
wonderful.
months. So
Okay, great.
Psoma,
Mhm.
Soma
Mhm.
Yoga.
Mhm. Bye, everybody. Mhm.
What are your questions around spiritual practice? Do you have any?
Hi, Flint.
Hi there.
Hi. So, in terms of being open to the mystery, surrendering to the mystery, the closest I feel that I get to that place is appreciating the miracle of our bodies, of nature. What gets in the way for me is I'm always evaluating everything. Um, and Today, for example, I got a parking ticket, and it said that I hadn't paid enough. And on the way home from where I was convinced that it was because I was too lazy to check my license plate number, which I've never memorized completely. So the whole way home, which was, thank goodness, only about 10 minutes, I was scolding myself and thinking it was a very good thing that I was doing this, that I was correcting myself for cutting corners and this kind of thing. So turns out that wasn't the reason. Apparently he thought I didn't put enough money in, but it was really amazing to me how, number one, the scolding was very natural, and then it was felt to be a positive thing in terms of correcting myself, improving myself, all of that. So that's kind of the question, is how to recognize that as a foe, as Donna was saying, a foe to being open to the mystery of what's around us.
Well, if you think about it, it's a perfect example of you were caught in a self-centered dream because you even said, I tend to do this, like that's what you practice. And you're holding to self-centered thoughts because you thought it was a good thing. It's a whole system that you learned, and that's the psychological side. And you know the reasons and the family context in which it was developed and how that would serve you. But by telling us the story and by reflecting on it, you've entered into a question. Like, wait a minute. Maybe this isn't the only practice here. It's the habitual one. It's a common one I'm familiar with. But you didn't stay in it completely because some part of you noticed you were doing it and some part of you said, oh, I even thought that was positive. You know? And so constant evaluation was the name you gave this process. So that must be a management strategy you learned a long time ago, once again. And what's the fear if you're not doing that all the time? If you're not constantly evaluating, what bad is going to happen?
I don't know, and that's the
That's the
fear.
worst one, isn't it?
It's exactly the fear of not knowing, and also fear of freedom. I think fear of freedom.
Well, here you go. And there are the things that actually spiritual practice invites: freedom through not knowing. On the spiritual side, it says, oh, that's the path. And on the psychological side, that's the problem. And that's where we get caught. And that's why it requires a teacher or spiritual friends that says, oh, Rosemary, let's talk about this. Let's be together. You know, if you allow me, I went back and looked at the description for inquiry that we have written up, you know, on the website and things, to see if it matched my idea of a spiritual practice. And I'm going to read just a little tiny bit of the beginning of it. So listen to this. Inquiry is an opportunity to participate in an intimate investigation about how to live an awakened life in the everyday world. And these warm encounters were offered a chance to explore our struggles and questions related to releasing unnecessary suffering. This opportunity opens in the direct meeting with a Zen teacher in a group setting and unfolds further through sharing the intimacy of practice-based inquiry with others. Without relying too much on ancient rituals or formalized structure, inquiry is an opportunity to share our deepest sorrows and our greatest joys as we face the challenges of our everyday lives, held in the warm embrace of Sangha. And it's a place where the Dharma emerges naturally and spontaneously in this intimate meeting. Does that sound like a spiritual practice? And that's the container what makes it possible to face the thing that you're terrified by, which actually is the opening. Otherwise, I think it's just too hard. And another tricky piece, you don't have to have it all worked out psychologically. Yes, there are aspects of trauma and psychological that can be in the way so strongly that you can't move forward along the path. That's true. And you need to do that work. You know this well. But the fact that working all that out is what moves us into the space isn't the whole thing.
It's a very different paradigm.
Yeah, and so you're noticing this thing which came from an ordinary activity, a parking ticket, showed you, oh, here's an entry point. Here's a habit. Here's where I cling. Here's where I hold. Here's an opportunity to turn towards life as it is and move into a deeper question of what would it be like to live without constantly evaluating myself in the world. Staying alert, awake, but not with the veil, the lens of evaluation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Aloha.
I just realized after I raised my hand, I'm sitting where there's lots of noise. So anyway, here it'll be brief.
Are you on Maui?
Yes, I'm in Maui. I will go to Kauai later today
Oh, good.
and meet up with Ed Sanchez.
That's right.
Anyway,
More Sangha meetings in the Pacific.
yes, I just had to say hello.
How are you doing? Judith was in the retreat in Molokai, as you might imagine, given that she's in Maui. How are you doing today?
Very well. And I
Good.
completely relate. I want to thank Rosemary too. I just want to say I'm right there with you, sister. I'm right there. And making an intentional effort to let it be. Watch it, learn from it, that constant evaluation that heretofore has not let me speak very much in this group
Mhm.
because I don't have anything worthwhile to say.
I also want to say that I know that there are times when it was really rough during the retreat just because of many, many factors.
Oh,
And,
yes.
it's good to see that you come to a different place. It's good to see.
Yes. It's good to be here. And I spent the time since I left you getting here.
Yeah, good, good. Well, I hope that your travels are good and that you can give Ed a hug for all of us and enjoy your time. Hi, Becky.
Hi, Flint. Thank you so much for that. I think it wove together many parts of things that are real basic and real expansive. And I don't really have exactly a question, but I really wanted to share something. After we got going, I thought, oh, I want to share this, which is that across the last week, there's been a song arising for me
Huh?
and coming to me. And it's not anywhere near done. It's completely in process, but I'd like to share it. How simple can I make this? How simple let it be? Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Sharp rocks in the water, smoothed by the flow. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Stillness into nothing, no thingness to peace. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out.
That is so beautiful. Everybody is giving you the little, can you see?
I have to change my view to do that.
Oh yeah,
Oops,
but
not
whoop,
that view.
not that one. You change to gallery view and watch, look at everybody, because they're going to go, "Oh, that's fantastic." That's so beautiful.
I, I, it's not done, but I'm not necessarily the one to complete it. And I'd like to share it in a way at some point where everybody can keep adding their own part that's current at the moment, because it feels like that kind of thing.
Yes, yes, that's so beautiful. Thank you. And thank you for
Thank
the courage to offer it in its current state, doesn't have to be perfected, and to offer it with your own voice. It's kind of like Judith was saying, it's a big thing to share your voice, with everybody. And so it's lovely to hear your expression.
you.
Mhm.
Love you all.
Up to you. Here we are in the last just couple of moments of our time. I was thinking that Becky sort of, in a way, did our final chant for us, didn't she? It was so lovely. If we now um, use our voices for the verse of the robe, uh, it's a nice reflection on the essence of the embodiment of spiritual practice, how we take it forward. So let's do that now. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Vast is the robe of liberation, a formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. Thank you so much. And thanks, Donna, for coming on and helping me out a little bit. And everyone who came forward. It's always a blessing to hear your voices and for you to share your heart in this way.
Thank you so much, Flint. Thank you. And thank you all for showing up and being here today. I was going to say this evening again, but today, I'll stick with today. And Appamada's programs and its facilities are supported through all of your generosity. So if you would like to make a donation and offer dana to teachers such as Flint, and I see Laurie's here tonight as well, please do go to the Appamada calendar at appamada.org/contribute. And there you'll see an opportunity to offer dana to teachers or to just to offer dana generally. You can make a one-time donation or you can sign up for regular to offer dana on a regular basis. But anything at all is very welcome. And thank you all so much. Thank you. Your presence is more than anything. And if you'd like to continue to the conversation that Flint has begun, then please do stay right where you are and join myself and others on the virtual porch. Thank you all so much.